Welcome to Thou Shalt Not Suffer, the Witch Trial podcast. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack.
This is part 3 of our Connecticut Witch Trials 101 series.
In this episode, we're going to cover witchcraft accusations in Connecticut during the period from 1648 through 1661.
Between those years, at least 16 people were accused of witchcraft in the Connecticut and New Haven colonies.
We say at least because the records are incomplete.
6 people were executed in Connecticut colony between 1648 and 1654.
As we discuss these cases, we'll cover the role of John Winthrop Jr. and like-minded colonial leaders in subduing the urge to dispatch those believed by some to have used magic for sinister purposes.
Winthrop himself was an alchemical physician and a student of natural magic.
Like many, he believed that the devil could help people cause harm.
However, he believed all magic originated from nature. The beliefs weren't as black and white as a lot of people, including historians, tend to portray them. It wasn't just like a black and white issue. Magic and Puritanism weren't entirely incompatible.
Before we begin, we want to warn you that the stories you will hear from us may be different than the way you've heard them before.
For generations, historians and genealogists have attempted to flesh out the details of the trial participants' lives. Over time, our understanding of the Connecticut witch trials has developed as more has been uncovered, and many inaccuracies have been found in these early volumes.
In our narrative, we will tell you the prevailing theories.
We will also share our reasons for doubting some of these claims. The sources we rely upon for the facts we can know are the court records of the witchcraft cases themselves,
and the other original 17th century documents that can reliably be linked to those involved.
We begin with the 1648 case of Mary Johnson.
Mary lived in Wethersfield and was most likely a servant.
You may know of Wethersfield from reading The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear.
While that book is entirely fiction, 8 real-life Wethersfield residents are known to have been accused of witchcraft in the 17th century.
In 1646, Mary Johnson was convicted of theft.
To punish her, the court ordered she be whipped immediately in Hartford and a month later in Wethersfield.
Sadly, this was not the end of her troubles.
On December 7, 1648, she was convicted of witchcraft.
The jury found her guilty because she confessed.
Cotton Mather later wrote that she was pressured to confess by Samuel Stone, a minister.
Mather published his story about Mary more than 40 years after her execution.
He claimed she confessed not only to witchcraft, but also to murdering a child.
And to, quote, uncleanness with men and devils.
According to Mather, Mary said that she was unhappy with the work her employer assigned her.
So she asked a devil to help.
And it did sweep the hearth and drive hogs out of her boss's field.
Mather also wrote that she had a conversion experience in jail.
And she, quote, went out of the world with many hopes of mercy through the merit of Jesus Christ.
She, and I quote again from Mather, died in a frame extremely to the satisfaction of them that were spectators of it. She went out humble and repentant.
Executions were public events.
Large crowds came out to witness what happened to those who had committed felonies.
Parents brought their children for an educational experience.
Now, we'd like to clear up some long-time confusion about Mary Johnson.
In 1885, Charles Herbert Livermore wrote that Mary Johnson's execution was delayed due to pregnancy.
He added that her child was later given to the son of the jailkeeper.
This information was repeated in an essay by Charles Dudley Warner in 1886.
And has continued to be handed down from one historian to another ever since.
This was included in one of the most significant works on witchcraft accusations in Connecticut, John M. Taylor's 1908 book, The Witchcraft Delusion in Colonial Connecticut, 1647 to 1697.
The pregnancy and the transfer of the child have even been reported as fact in works published this decade, and the tale is often retold on the internet.
Unfortunately, the story is associated with the wrong woman.
In a 1974 essay, William K. Holdsworth writes that the confusion came about because two Johnsons were convicted of crimes in Connecticut within a relatively short time.
As Holdsworth points out, the original records do not state anything about a delay in Mary Johnson's execution.
Or that she was pregnant.
Cotton Mather also did not include an account of pregnancy or a delay in his telling of Mary Johnson's trial.
One goodwife, Elizabeth Johnson of Fairfield, was convicted of a crime in May 1650.
Several clues are contained within that last sentence.
The Johnson in this second trial was called Goodwife, making it clear that she was married.
In fact, the records state that she was the wife of Peter Johnson.
The name of the woman in this case is given as Elizabeth rather than Mary.
This Elizabeth Johnson was from Fairfield, not Wethersfield, where Mary lived.
Even by modern roads, these two towns are separated by 56 miles.
In addition, this Johnson was convicted in May 1650, whereas Mary Johnson was convicted in December 1648.
And most likely was hanged within days of her conviction, though the record of her conviction does not explicitly state this.
Our conclusion is that this is a tale of two different women.
In summary, Mary Johnson was not pregnant when she was tried and did not leave a baby for the jailer. Elizabeth Johnson did. In addition, we do not know what crime Elizabeth Johnson was tried for. It is theorized that she may have been tried for adultery because there is a reference to a Thomas Newton paying out of his account for the upkeep of the child, which was born to Elizabeth while she was in jail for 24 weeks. Please see the links in our show notes and bibliography to view the records firsthand.
Goodwife Palmer of Wethersfield was accused of witchcraft in 1648 by John Robbins.
A December 7, 1648 court record states that the court frees Henry Palmer from his recognizance for his wives appearing at the last particular court to answer the complaint of Mr. Robbins, as also remit the miscarriage of his wife therein, hoping it will be a warning to her and others for the future.
Unfortunately, the court order for recognizance is not included in the records of the particular court which exists today.
Though this record does not specify why the recognizance was ordered, it is believed to have been due to a complaint of witchcraft.
This belief is predicated on events which followed many years later.
In Detestable and Wicked Arts, historian Paul B. Moyer states that suspicions of witchcraft may have been voiced about Goodwife Palmer in the 1650s, but no legal action was taken.
In Entertaining Satan, John Demos proposes the name Catherine for Henry Palmer's wife, but we have not located a source to verify this.
Moyer also suggests that the 1648 case against Henry Palmer's wife may have been related to the case that same year of Mary Johnson, who was also from Wethersfield.
Johnson was convicted the day that Palmer was freed from his recognizance for his wife.
Further evidence is needed to prove the connection. At the same court session that Johnson is convicted, Palmer is freed from this recognizance, which is the bond that he posted for his wife's good behavior. And so the supposition is that Palmer and Johnson were both accused of witchcraft, possibly by John Robbins at the same time, but only Mary Johnson was convicted and Palmer wasn't actually tried. When you look at the record of it, there's a line that is Mary Johnson is indicted, and then there's a line about something else. And then there's a line about this complaint of Mr. Robbins. And it's referring back to a previous court session that we don't have a record of, unfortunately. So it's another one of those, what was the complaint of Mr. Robbins? Then you look later and Mr. Robbins is complaining later about Palmer being a witch. So you're thinking that, because later on she's a witch, that he complained about Palmer in 1648 of witchcraft. It's just the timing of it. They're from the same town. They're both in court the same day. One's convicted of witchcraft. One's saying that this guy complained of her about something that required her husband to post a bond for good behavior. So what could that be? And there's only a few things it could be.
And we know from other trials that the behavior is a huge deal when it comes to alleging that someone's a witch.
They tell them in other cases to be on your best behavior and don't go around offending your neighbors, because of course they're going to think you're a witch and we're going to bring you back to court. They might have been accused together, and then for whatever reason Palmer gets off and Johnson doesn't, maybe because of their status in the community. Henry Palmer's wife was accused of witchcraft by Rebecca Greensmith and the Robbins family during the Hartford witch trials of 1662 to 1663.
Goodwife Palmer did not stick around for the Hartford witch hunt. Instead, she and Henry likely left Connecticut for Rhode Island in 1662.
Goodwife Palmer was once again accused of witchcraft in Connecticut in 1667, but was not in that colony any longer.
A Goodwife Palmer was later accused in Rhode Island in 1672 by Stephen Seabrier, who was ordered to apologize to Henry Palmer for calling his wife a witch.
We'll have more about Goodwife Palmer in part 4 of this series when we discuss the Hartford witch trials of 1662 to 1663.
Now we're going to speak to you about the first New England couple to be accused of witchcraft together.
Records show that Joan and John Carrington, also of Wethersfield, were indicted on witchcraft charges in 1651.
A John Carrington came to New England in 1635 with a Mary Carrington.
Both were recorded as being 33 years old when they arrived. Names like John and Mary were very common in 17th century New England. And it is quite possible that multiple Carrington families came to New England around the same time. As I've seen with my own ancestors, that has happened with so many of my lines. There have been people with the same name or very similar names that get confused with each other.
A John Carrington bought land in Wethersfield in 1643.
Many presume John had a son, also named John, who was an original proprietor of Farmington, Connecticut, who later settled Mattituck, now Waterbury.
Others believe the second John had a sister Rebecca, who married Abraham Andrews of Farmington, who also moved to Mattituck.
However, no evidence has been shown to connect John Carrington of Wethersfield to either the John who came over with Mary or the John who lived in Farmington and Mattituck.
Therefore, because we do not have records, we cannot say that the John Carrington charged with witchcraft had children with either Mary or Joan.
What we can say is that John Carrington of Wethersfield was a carpenter, as recorded in the indictment for witchcraft.
In March 1650, he was convicted of selling a gun to a Native American and was fined 10 pounds.
A. John Carrington's estate was valued at only 23 pounds and 11 shillings in 1653, with an associated debt of a little over 10 pounds, leaving 13 pounds, 1 shilling, and 6 pence. No heir is named in the record summarized in Charles William Manwaring's A Digest of the Early Connecticut Probate Records.
The 1651 witchcraft indictments accused Joan and John of entertaining familiarity with the devil and using his help to perform works above the course of nature.
The Carringtons were convicted on March 6, 1651.
The indictments specified the death sentence as the appropriate penalty.
Quote, according to the law of God, and of the established law of this commonwealth, thou deservest to die.
As we read in part 2 of the series, the sentence of death was ordered for all convicted of witchcraft.
As it says in the King James Version of the Bible, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live.
The couple was most likely hanged together in Hartford very soon after their convictions.
We believe they were hanged and were one of only 2 couples hanged together for witchcraft in British North America.
As we'll cover in the next episode in the series, Rebecca and Nathaniel Greensmith were the other couple hanged together.
Now, the Salem magistrates did condemn both Elizabeth and John Proctor.
However, Elizabeth's hanging was delayed due to pregnancy, and she was reprieved by the governor in 1693.
Martha and Giles Corey were also victims of the Salem witch trials together, who were a married couple. However, Giles refused to stand trial and was pressed to death rather than hanged.
Next, we have the case of Goodwife Bassett of Fairfield.
We only know about her witchcraft accusation through one brief court record and a 1654 defamation suit filed by Mary Staples against colonial leader Roger Ludlow.
The court record states that the governor and 2 other men were to go to Stratford for the trial of Goody Bassett for her life.
This entry was dated May 15, 1651.
We next hear of Bassett in the Staples case, in which a witness testified that Goodwife Bassett, when she was condemned, said there was another witch in Fairfield that held her head full high.
While Goodwife Bassett's given and maiden names are not known, she may have been the wife of Thomas Bassett. We've also seen a book theorizing that she was the wife of a Robert Bassett.
Thomas Bassett arrived in the colonies in 1635 and first made his home in Dorchester, Massachusetts.
It was there that he likely first encountered Thomas Thornton, a man we spoke of in the last episode in the series.
If you recall, Thornton was a tanner who resided next to Alice Young in Windsor, Connecticut in the 1640s.
He lost 4 children to the epidemic, which may have been the cause of the accusations against Alice.
But the Thorntons and the Youngs were just some of the many Dorchester, Massachusetts settlers who made the move to Windsor.
Thomas Bassett also relocated to Windsor and lived there at the same time as the Thorntons and the Youngs.
It was in 1650 that Thomas Bassett relocated to Stratford.
That same year, John Young and the Thorntons also moved from Windsor to Stratford.
Thomas Thornton was elected Stratford's deputy to the Connecticut General Court in 1651, the very year Goodwife Bassett hanged.
As noted in Between God and Satan by Beth Caruso and Dr. Catherine Hermes, Thornton was in proximity to several witch trials.
His exact role in any of these trials is not yet known.
As mentioned previously on the show, the Stratford Historical Society is hosting several events in April and May to honor Goodwife Bassett's memory.
The Society is leading commemorative walks retracing Goodwife Bassett's last steps on May 3rd and 10th at 7 p.m. These feature historical commentary by the town historian David Wright.
The inaugural Goody Bassett Ball will take place on Saturday, May 20th at 6 p.m.
More information can be found on the Society's webpage. You'll find a link in the show description.
Following the Bassett hanging, Goodwife Knapp of Fairfield was also charged with witchcraft.
She hanged in 1653.
Again, we know about her case through the Staples defamation suit.
Unfortunately, the testimony in that case refers to her only as Goody Knapp.
We do not know her given or maiden names.
We do not know the identity of her husband.
We hope records with this information will be located one day.
In 2019, a memorial plaque was placed in the Black Rock community in Bridgeport, Connecticut, in Goodwife Knapp's honor.
The court record for Mary Staples' defamation suit against Roger Ludlow indicates that Ludlow had accused Staples because she, quote, had laid herself under a new suspicion of being a witch, that she had caused Knapp's wife to be new searched after she was hanged, and when she saw the teats, said if they were the marks of a witch, then she was one, or she had such marks.
The document also reports that according to Mary Staples, Roger Ludlow had said that Knapp had told him Staples was a witch.
However, Thomas Lyon told the court he was watching Goody Knapp when 5 women came in and asked her to confess. Knapp responded that she was not a witch, and she would not name Mary Staples as a witch.
And one Hester Ward claimed that Goody Knapp had told her that Mary Staples had admitted to receiving 2 little things brighter than the light of day from a Native American.
She purportedly called the mystery items, quote, Indian gods.
Goodwife Sherwood questioned Knapp about the objects.
According to Sherwood, Knapp denied ever saying that anyone in town had taken the shiny objects from the Native American. In other words, Knapp was saying that she never accused Goody Staples of taking the shiny objects that were known as, quote, Indian gods. Knapp, time and again, we're seeing, denied that Staples had anything to do with witchcraft. And this is another denial of that. So that's the significance of that statement. Staples is saying that Knapp isn't a witch, and Knapp, according to all these witnesses, repeatedly says that I'm not calling Staples a witch because she isn't one. I'm not one. She's not one.
Ultimately, Roger Ludlow was found to have defamed Staples and was ordered to pay Thomas Staples £15 for falsely accusing his wife of witchcraft and for court costs.
Roger Ludlow was a colonial official. He had written the laws of Connecticut.
So isn't that interesting that he was found to have defamed?
They're basically saying that you lied, that you called her something and you couldn't prove that she was a witch. In 1653, the same year that Knapp was executed, Mrs. Elizabeth Godman of New Haven went to court to complain about several people who she said had called her a witch.
That's interesting.
This is a defamation that backfires.
Elizabeth Godman struck terror in the hearts of her supposed victims, causing one to sweat profusely and another to faint.
And this is just saying that because they believed so strongly that she was a witch, they had these visceral physical reactions when they crossed her and she reacted to them with either a stare or some words. One person said that she sweated so much in her bed after having a dream about Knapp that she woke up and it was like she was floating on water. And another person, Stephen Goodyear, actually said that Knapp gave him a dirty look and he swooned.
When you consider their belief and fear of witches, and then here is the embodiment of one interacting directly with them, you can feel their terror and understand these reactions.
And psychological terror does produce known chemical reactions within the body that can elevate the heart rate, cause you to sweat, cause you to breathe differently, cause you to faint. This is all part of your fight or flight response or freeze.
Yeah, it is.
And so if you really believe in your heart and in your mind that somebody is a witch and they're capable of harming you, you can actually, in essence, harm yourself just through your body's reactions to your psychological state.
And so that is what would be happening today in these communities where they believe this alleged witch is causing death and sickness and misfortune. They are having these type of responses in their bodies and minds.
Yes, we see this happening around the world today. We see it throughout the history of witch trials in a lot of the testimony. It's possible that it happened with the afflicted persons in Salem and with other afflicted persons that they were so distressed that they became physically ill and psychologically traumatized.
And then imagine if you are actually ill and then psychologically traumatized from your fear of who is causing your illness.
Yes, that just compounds it, and that can lead your health to really deteriorate rapidly.
And you know who comes to mind with me on that is Timothy Swan in North Andover.
Yes, that's a good one. I was thinking of one we'll talk about later is Betty Howell, who is supposedly afflicted. She starts having some kind of fits, and then she just becomes really ill and rapidly deteriorates and passes because she's in such a panic that whatever physically might have been going on with her, just that mental fear gets added to that.
That's such a good use of the word panic in these situations. The panic is in the accusers. It's interesting
Yeah, it's in the supposedly bewitched people. They're panicking in their own selves about being terrorized by this witch, thinking that, oh, she's going to kill me. And then it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. That witch is going to kill me. And then you get really sick and you die. There's clinical cases of people having heart attacks and different reactions to intense fright. Not fearing witches is good for all of us. So we want to remove the witch fear and show people that there's other reasons why misfortune happens. You've got to remove the layer of mystery and give explanations why things happen when they do. New Haven's leading minister, John Davenport, quote, had occasion to speak of witches and showed that a froward, discontented frame of spirit was a subject fit for the devil to work upon in that way. As a result, Goodwife Larimore considered Godman to have the appearance of such a person.
Mrs. Atwater allegedly claimed Godman was married to a Manitou named Habamock, a giant stone spirit known to the Quinnipiac.
A common motif is expressed in many of the testimonies against Elizabeth Godman. When someone refused to sell, barter, or give anything to her, misfortune followed. And we see that again in witch trial after witch trial in Salem with Sarah Good. Samuel Parris refuses to give her anything. She goes away muttering something. They believe then that she cursed them in spite, where really it's their guilt for not giving her what she wanted.
Godman was a widow who lived with Stephen Goodyear.
He was the deputy governor of the New Haven colony.
The magistrates questioned Godman and the people she complained about.
Godman was accused of afflicting people and animals following quarrels.
She was also supposed to have laid upon a bed, quote, as if somebody was sucking her.
This was another reference to the belief that witches had teats from which they fed devils and familiars or imps.
Godman supposedly also talked to herself.
And I just want to point out that's another common thing, as we just mentioned the case of Sarah Good. She went away muttering something to herself, and people believed that she was muttering curses. It was considered aberrant behavior to talk to yourself in public. And people are like, that's odd. She must be up to something. And Godman knew what others did and said when she was not there.
Godman's defamation claim was rejected.
However, she did not face trial for witchcraft.
Nicholas Auger, a New Haven physician, consulted John Winthrop Jr. about the mysterious afflictions of 3 women.
Historian Walter Woodward writes that Winthrop's diagnosis likely saved Godman's life.
However, most of the correspondence between Auger and Winthrop is missing, so we don't know precisely what effect Winthrop's response may have had on the case.
In any event, the court ordered Godman to look after her carriage hereafter,
and to not go in an offensive way to folks' houses in a railing manner, as it seems she hath done, but that she keep her place and meddle with her own business.
The magistrates warned her that she now was considered suspicious and would be brought back to court if additional evidence was brought in against her to show that she was a witch.
Even though she's the one that walked in first.
Yeah, hey, these people are pointing fingers at me. I'm going to point back at them. And they're like, the court's like, well, we think they have a point.
Godman was indeed called back to court on August 7th, 1655.
She was again accused of causing a series of strange events and bewitching animals.
On this occasion, she was jailed.
Considering her to be in poor health, the court released her into the custody of Thomas Johnson on September 4th and warned her to return to court in October.
At an October 17 court session, Godman was ordered to pay £50 bond to ensure her good behavior and warned she would be jailed again if she gave cause.
She was warned that she must forbear from going from house to house to give offense and carry it orderly in the family where she is.
Her bond was paid out of her estate on January 1st, 1656.
Elizabeth Godwin died in 1660.
When she died, her estate was valued at 200 pounds.
In 1654, the same year as the Staples lawsuit, Lydia Gilbert of Windsor was accused of practicing witchcraft.
She was indicted on November 28th for allegedly bewitching Thomas Allen's gun,
which had misfired during a militia exercise 3 years earlier,
and killed Henry Styles.
Allen had already been convicted of homicide by misadventure and paid a fine.
It is unknown why Gilbert was accused 3 years after the fact.
Not much is known for certain about Lydia Gilbert. The indictment against her does not specify a husband or even refer to Gilbert as goodwife.
All evidence we have seen to link Lydia and Thomas has been circumstantial and based upon Thomas's business relationship with Henry Styles.
We do know that Styles and Allen had some previous business relationship and that Gilbert had business relationships with the other two, but this is with Thomas Gilbert, and I haven't seen the name Lydia in any court records other than the one brief record about her trial. There was a Lydia Bliss in jail with a Thomas Gilbert. In 1643, the court ordered a Thomas Gilbert and a Lydia Bliss jailed along with George Gibbs and James Willett. I don't know if we know what offense they were in there for. So we're just saying like these two people knew each other before. They had some kind of prior relationship, and her name's Lydia. And like we said before, these are inferences. And there's not a marriage record that says Thomas Gilbert Jr. of Windsor married Lydia Bliss, daughter of such and such. So you go through a chain of inferences to get there. Henry Styles may have roomed at one Thomas Gilbert's house, and Lydia may have been his wife, his daughter, his sister, or another relative.
One thing we can say for sure is that Gilbert was convicted.
The court record of her case makes this quite clear.
She was likely executed.
Like many of the victims, no record of an execution exists today.
However, like the others, she disappears from the record after the conviction and is therefore presumed to have been hanged as the law specified. It really goes to show that the same processes you use when you're doing work in your family tree, connecting one generation to the next by a reliable record, is the same process that needs to be done when you're connecting individuals in a history research to their spouses and to their children. If you can't, that's the equivalent of a brick wall in your tree.
A lot of times we rely upon the work that someone else has done before us when we should be verifying their information from primary sources and making those connections ourselves.
You wouldn't just take somebody's branch from their tree and graft it into yours without looking at how the record matches your family line. And with these individuals, we need to see how is the record putting the story together. And if the record's not there, you can't put the story together. That part of the story can't go together.
Be careful not to leap to conclusions.
But just like when you're working on your family tree, you can have a working branch where it's an open research. You can continue to do that. You can consider things a possibility, but that's all that it is until you know. His wife and Nicholas Bailey were the next couple to be accused of witchcraft.
They were brought to court for other things on July 3rd, 1655.
Impudent and notorious lying.
Endeavoring to make discord among neighbors.
And filthy and unclean speeches.
In court, quote, sundry passages taken in writing were read, which being duly considered doth render them both, but especially the woman, very suspicious in point of witchcraft. But for matters of that nature, the court intends not to proceed at this time.
They were ordered out of town.
Quote, betwixt this court and the next court, they must consider of a way how to remove themselves to some other place, or give sufficient security to the court's satisfaction for their good behavior, and pay the fine for lying, which is 10 shillings.
However, the couple delayed moving.
They came back to court August 7, 1655.
The court granted a delay until the middle of April of 1656, but only if they paid £40 security that they would leave, plus £50 bond for good behavior, and attended every monthly court session during the delay.
On September 4th, 1655, the court told them to come back to the next session on the first Tuesday of October and an additional session the third Wednesday of October.
They returned to court October 2nd, 1655.
And were told they would be excused from future court appearances if they removed before the third Wednesday of that month.
The records end there, so it is believed that the Baileys did indeed leave the colony.
Walter Woodward writes that John Winthrop Jr. likely had a role in the decision to exile rather than execute the Baileys. William Meeker filed a slander suit in 1657 against Thomas Mulliner, who he said accused him of bewitching some pigs.
The two had shared some time in court the previous year.
On that occasion, Mulliner was on trial for allegedly stealing swine from another neighbor.
And Meeker testified against him.
Later, the two had an argument.
Meeker claimed that Mulliner had broken his fence.
And Mulliner believed Meeker got his revenge by casting a spell on his pigs.
Mulliner lost the slander suit and was ordered to apologize to Meeker and to post a £50 bond for his good behavior.
The next to be accused was Elizabeth Garlick of East Hampton on Long Island.
At this time, East Hampton was part of Connecticut.
Garlick was tried in 1658.
This was the first witchcraft case John Winthrop Jr. worked on in an official capacity.
Now serving as governor of Connecticut Colony, he presided over the court.
Before Garlick's trial, Connecticut had tried 7 people for witchcraft. All had been convicted and executed.
As chief magistrate, Winthrop had considerable influence over the proceedings.
His presence at the least brought balance to the court.
Of the 7 magistrates on the court, 4 had previously been involved in multiple witchcraft cases resulting in conviction.
Garlick was the wife of Joseph or Joshua Garlick.
Joseph or Joshua was a business intermediary between John Winthrop Jr. and Lyon Gardiner on at least 2 occasions when Winthrop was living in Saybrook.
The Garlicks perhaps lived on Gardiner's Island from 1650 or earlier until they relocated to East Hampton on Long Island in 1653.
In East Hampton, Garlick acquired nearly 100 acres over time and owned livestock.
Badbeer says Garlick was a healer in the Devil's Dominion.
Godbeer bases this on a deposition of a woman named Goodwife Bishop, who went to Elizabeth Garlick and obtained an herb called dockweed that had some medicinal purposes. However, every woman at the time, especially every wife and mother, was the nurse of their household and had common herbs on hand for treating illnesses. So we don't know if that meant that she was a professional healer or not. We're looking into the records in more detail to see, and there are a lot of implications in this label as healer, as it's popularly believed that healers and even midwives were common targets of witchcraft accusations. Scott R. Ferrara and John Demos have written that Garlick's maiden name was probably Blanchard.
And Demos notes that her possible father may have been a French Huguenot.
9 accusers testified at Elizabeth Garlick's trial.
Garlick was accused of bewitching Elizabeth Howell to death. Howell was the daughter of prominent citizen Lyon Gardiner and the wife of Arthur Howell, whose father was the leading citizen of Southampton.
Garlic was also accused of killing a man, an African-American child, 2 infants, and some piglets.
Further, one Goody Edwards claimed Garlic had caused her daughter's breast milk to dry up.
Garlic was also accused of bewitching an ox and a sow.
It's so many wild accusations. That's so many accusations. It reminds me of Rebecca Nurse.
Yeah, all of the Salem people, it was just neighbors coming in saying, oh, we, disagreed about this or that. And then she railed at me. And then the next day, my horse fell over.
A goodwife, Han, claimed that when she learned of her sow's affliction, neighbors burned its tail, upon which Elizabeth Garlic came in.
This is significant because it was believed, and we see this in several witch trials, and we'd covered it in a previous episode, that burning a bewitched object returned the curse to the witch. Elizabeth Garlic was acquitted, but her husband had to post 30 pounds bond for his wife's good behavior and to appear at the next court session in East Hampton.
Governor Winthrop Jr. wrote to East Hampton to tell the people there to carry neighborly and peaceably without just offense to Joshua Garlic and his wife. He also told the Garlics to do the same toward the others in town.
The Garlics lived to old age. The town record of Goodman Garlic's death in 1700 estimated his age at about 100 years.
Elizabeth's death is not recorded, but a later estimate says one of the Garlics lived to be 105 and the other 110. Demos estimates these figures were exaggerated by a decade. Next, an unknown resident of Saybrook was accused of witchcraft.
Court record states, Mr. Willis is requested to go down to Saybrook to assist the major in examining the suspicions about witchery, and to act therein as may be requisite. June 15th, 1659.
The major mentioned here was John Mason, a leading figure in Connecticut colony's early history.
Mr. Willis was Samuel Willis, who left behind a collection of documents known as the Willis Papers.
These papers do include records of witch trials, but do not include this incident.
The person or persons suspected of witchery are unnamed in the record that we do have, and no indictment exists from this time period to show that the case ever reached a grand jury or a trial jury. Margaret and Nicholas Jennings of Saybrook were the next couple to be accused of witchcraft.
So it is interesting that the unknown Saybrook was before a known Saybrook.
But there's a 2-year gap. So I've seen some writers tie the two incidents together and say that Margaret and Nicholas Jennings were suspected in 1659 and indicted in 1661. But again, you're missing a link to say that the 1661 case had to do with the 1659 suspicions of witchery.
But in any case, there were suspicions going on in the community there.
There were. Something was going on, and people were suspicious at the time of witchcraft.
In 1643, they were convicted for running away from indentured servitude, theft, and fornication, whipped, and ordered by the court to marry each other. Margaret and Nicholas were indicted for suspected witchcraft on September 5th, 1661.
They were accused of bewitching to death the wife of Reynold Marvin and the child of Belshazzar de Wolf.
They were acquitted on October 9th, 1661.
Quote, respecting Nicholas Jennings, the jury returned that the major part find him guilty of the indictment. The rest strongly suspected that he is guilty.
Quote, respecting Margaret Jennings, the jury returned that some of them find her guilty. The rest strongly suspect her to be guilty of the indictment.
But because the jury did not agree in full on either indictment, the couple were released from jail and left the colony.
It's interesting to me that there could be some she's guilty and others strongly suspect. It relates to the 7 indicators of someone being a witch. And then after that, there were things that strongly cause suspicion, but don't necessarily prove. It's interesting to me that there's this gray area like that.
There's a difference between suspicion and evidence. there are things that lead you to question a suspect. And then there are things that lead you to indict the suspect. And then there are stronger things needed to convict the suspect. And this is a sign, I think, also of the changing times, possibly because of Winthrop's influence in the area. Between 1655 and 1661, no one's convicted. You start having these suspicions, and they're saying that there isn't quite enough evidence here, where before it was a slam dunk for the prosecution. 7 of the first 7 people in Connecticut colony, at least, were convicted. So they had a perfect record going for a while. And now Mary Bingham is here with Minute with Mary.
I cannot comprehend the intense anxiety I would experience if someone falsely accused me of a crime I did not commit. Then to realize if I were found guilty, I could be executed. This was a painful reality of 3 of my ancestors in 1692, Susanna Martin, Sarah Wilds, and Mary Esty. From the time they were arrested at their homes, their journey became a living hell. After intense interrogation from the magistrates at the meeting house, coupled with noisy bystanders, they faced screaming accusers. Their accusers stated out loud that the specters of my ancestors and their familiars were allegedly flying about the room. Once the interrogation was over for each woman, they traveled by cart to the jail, which was small and overcrowded. Besides humans, other roommates would be lice, mice, rats, and other vermin. The stench of sickness fills the dark interior where all of the accused for witchcraft were shackled. Puritans believed the shackles prevented the specters of the accused for witchcraft to go forth from their personal bodies to afflict harm on other people. Then came the days of the execution. About 1 week after the guilty verdict was handed down for each woman, my ancestors would have been placed on a cart and traveled with the High Sheriff, George Corwin, to Proctor's Ledge. The streets were lined with people as the cart traveled the long mile from the jail to the execution site, which included an incline to the final destination. How my grandmothers remained steadfast to the truth of their innocence to the end as they faced the cruelest form of death continues to be an inspiration to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Here's Sarah with In Witch Hunts News.
Awareness of the violent modern witch hunts against alleged witches is increasing across the world. International media, organizations, governments, and individuals want it to stop and are taking action and are educating about it. The United Nations Human Rights Council is acknowledging the crisis and urging additional efforts by affected states and by all stakeholders. We are all stakeholders in efforts to stop these witch attacks and abuse crimes against women and children. When you see it in the news, read about it and share it. Educate yourself and others. We have links in our show notes to a new YouTube documentary called Why Witch Hunts Are Not Just a Dark Chapter from the Past, with journalist Karen Helmstead, featuring important interviews with several experts, including Advocacy for Alleged Witches advocate Dr. Leo Igwe, Witches of Scotland advocate Dr. Zoe Vedetozzi, modern attack victims, and witch trial historians. Please see the show description for the link to watch it. Historically, people have been blamed for using witchcraft to manipulate weather to cause harm. King James VI of Scotland is infamously known to have done this. This mentality persists to this day. This week, at least 2 reports of witch attacks related to blaming a person for weather-related misfortune have been reported. One example is the misfortune of lightning strikes. The Nigeria Lightning Safety and Research Center reported that 2 innocent lives were taken due to false accusations of causing lightning strikes. I'm sorry to report that enraged youths buried the accused alive, and they perished. The Nigeria Lightning Safety and Research Center states, quote, "As a lightning safety organization, we condemn the tragic event and urge everyone to take lightning safety seriously. Thank you, Nigeria Lightning Safety and Research Center, for standing with the victims and for urgently educating about the science of lightning and effectuating crucial safety education. Links to news articles reporting these weather-blaming circumstances are in the show description. Next month, the Salem, Massachusetts area and Hartford and Farmington, Connecticut are getting a rare visit from Dr. Leo Igwe, director of the Advocacy for Alleged Witches nonprofit organization. It is an incredible honor for us to organize a week of speaking engagements during his May speaking tour in the United States and to accompany him as he speaks in places of historical significance to early American colony witch trial history. Witch persecutions and trials are ongoing incidents in Africa and on other continents, reportedly occurring in at least 60 nations around the world. Witchcraft accusation is still a form of death sentence. Across continents, thousands, mainly women and elderly persons, are accused, tried, attacked, killed, imprisoned, or banished every year. You can follow Dr. Leo Igwe on Twitter at Leo Igwe to see how he's advocating on the ground in the victim communities in real time as these individuals are experiencing being accused and hunted. This first event at the Salem Witch Museum is virtual, but Dr. Igwe will be with us in Salem touring the historic sites, guided by a local seasoned in the history, Mary Bingham. Tuesday, May 16th is your chance to experience a very special evening of in-person conversation with Leo at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead in Danvers. Please see the Facebook event for details. Isn't this a great week? Make sure you mark your calendars. Next, you can enjoy an in-person speaking event with Dr. Igwe at Central Connecticut State University on Wednesday, May 17th at 6 p.m. While in the Hartford area, Leo will be touring known witch trial historic sites with author Beth Prusso. On Thursday afternoon, May 18th, Leo will be presenting at the Stanley Whitman House Living History Center in Farmington, Connecticut. Look for Facebook events for all these occasions posted by our social media. Would you like to know more about Leo? You are in luck because we have a great podcast episode for you to listen to. For more info on Leo, listen to the episode Witchcraft Accusations in Nigeria with Dr. Leo Igwe. Come here, Leo. Invite your friends and family. See you there. Get involved. Visit endwitchhunts.org. To support us, purchase books from our bookshop or merch from our Zazzle shop. Our links are in the show description.
Thank you, Sarah. What did you learn today, Sarah?
Looking at the case of Palmer, it's just another reminder that this was ongoing. It was always ongoing, specifically for some individuals, but just that the court was always hearing these accusations of witchcraft. It takes away from the excuse of hysteria.
That's a wonderful point, that people had these long-running suspicions of particular neighbors. It wasn't all in a moment of panic. There was a whole chain of events. And when we talked to Malcolm Gaskell in episode 5, he talked about how there was often a decades-long history of suspicion before anybody actually went to the court. There was just one last thing that pushed things to that point, that took it into a legal process rather than an informal, just suspicion, gossip among neighbors. There's also the fact that the suspicion would follow a person even when they moved to a different colony, that neighbors there had presumably heard about her past, word of mouth or through letters. Hey, this Palmer family just moved here, and somebody's like, oh, really, them? She's a witch. So there's that.
Yeah, and I wonder how the people that were fearing the witches, like, what was that like for them, seeing these women walking around free that they knew were witches?
Exactly. Gaskell was talking about, as a practical matter, you would have tried to avoid those people and not cross them. Thank you for listening to Thou Shalt Not Suffer, the Witch Trial podcast.
Join us next week.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Visit thoushallnotsuffer.com.
Remember to tell your friends about the show.
Support our efforts to end witch hunts. Visit endwitchhunts.org to learn more.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.